There is a plant growing within walking distance of where you are sitting right now that contains more protein per dry weight than any vegetable ever measured. More than kale, more than spinach, more than broccoli, gram for gram, its leaves contain more protein than beef. This same plant was used to make fabric stronger than cotton for over 3,000 years. Bronze Age Europeans were buried in clothing woven from its fibres. Danish bog bodies pulled from the earth after 2,000 years were found wrapped in textiles made from this plant, the fabric still intact, still recognisable, outlasting the flesh it once covered. During World War I, when the British naval blockade cut off cotton supplies to Germany, the German military turned to this plant. By 1917, German factories were producing 2.7 million kilograms of fibre from it annually. 85% of German military uniforms were made from this plant. Soldiers fought and died in fabric woven from something that grows in every ditch and hedgerow across Europe. The plant is stinging nettle, and today it is classified as a noxious weed in most American states. Millions of dollars are spent annually on herbicides to eliminate it. The textile industry that once sustained nations has been so thoroughly erased that most people alive today have never heard of nettle cloth. They know only the sting. Welcome to Lost Plant Remedies. The oldest known nettle textile was found wrapped around a body in a Danish Bronze Age burial site dating to 2,800 years before the Common Era. That means humans were weaving nettle fabric nearly 5,000 years ago. But the relationship between humans and this plant goes back even further. When hikers discovered the frozen body of Otzi the Iceman in the Alps in 1991, preserved in glacial ice for 5,300 years, they found he was carrying a cord made from nettle fibre. The oldest known human to be recovered intact from the ancient world carried nettle with him. It was that essential. The reason becomes clear when you understand what nettle fibre actually is. The stems of the stinging nettle plant contain bast fibres similar to those found in flax and hemp, but with properties that in some ways exceed both. Nettle fibre is naturally antibacterial. It is more breathable than cotton. It is stronger than linen when wet. Medieval European texts describe nettle cloth as lasting generations, passed down from mother to daughter, outliving the people who wore it. In Scotland, nettle linen was traded as a luxury good until the early 1800s. The fabric was prized for its durability and its ability to soften with each washing while maintaining its strength. Scottish households kept nettle patches specifically for textile production. The plant was not a weed to be eliminated. It was a crop to be cultivated. The same was true across Europe. In Austria and Germany, nettle cultivation for fibre was documented for centuries. The German word for nettle fabric is Nesselstoff, and elderly Austrians alive today still remember grandparents who spoke of it. The knowledge existed within living memory. It has not been gone long. Then came the First World War. When Britain blockaded German ports, cotton imports collapsed almost overnight. Germany faced a crisis. Its soldiers needed uniforms, its civilians needed clothing. The industrial cotton supply chain that modern textile production depended upon had been severed. Germany turned to the plant that had clothed its ancestors for millennia. The German nettle program of World War I is one of the most remarkable and least remembered industrial mobilizations in history. The government mandated nettle collection. Civilians were required to harvest wild nettles and deliver them to processing centres. Factories that had produced cotton textiles were converted to process nettle fibre. By 1917, production had reached 2.7 million kilograms of usable fibre per year. German soldiers on the Western Front wore uniforms made from the same plant their Bronze Age ancestors had been buried in. The fabric performed exceptionally. Nettle uniforms were warmer than cotton, more durable in wet conditions, and naturally resistant to bacterial growth, an important quality in the trenches where infection killed nearly as many men as bullets. Reports from the period describe nettle cloth as superior to cotton for military use in almost every measurable way. When the war ended, so did the nettle textile industry. The Allied powers specifically targeted German nettle processing facilities during the post-war period. The infrastructure was dismantled and the knowledge was dispersed. Cotton interests in Britain and America had no desire to see a competitor emerge that could be grown in any temperate climate without tropical plantations or colonial labour systems. Nettle could not be controlled the way cotton could. It grew wild. It spread on its own. It could not be commodified in the same way. Within a generation, nettle cloth had been forgotten. The plant that had clothed soldiers and civilians through the greatest war the world had ever seen was reclassified. It became a weed, something to be sprayed, something to be eliminated. The sting that had once been a minor inconvenience, easily avoided by anyone who worked with the plant regularly, became its defining characteristic. Stinging nettle. The name itself became a warning rather than a description. But the protein content remained. The nutritional profile that had made nettle a staple food across Europe for thousands of years did not change simply because industrial agriculture decided to ignore it. When researchers actually measure the protein content of dried nettle leaves, the numbers are difficult to believe. Depending on growing conditions and harvest timing, nettle leaves contain between 25 and 30% protein by dry weight. To put that in perspective, beef contains approximately 26% protein. Nettle leaves, the ones growing in the ditch by the road, contain as much protein as steak. But protein quantity is only part of the story. Protein quality matters as well. Nettle contains all essential amino acids. It is a complete protein source, something extremely rare in the plant kingdom. Most plant proteins are incomplete, lacking one or more essential amino acids that humans cannot synthesize and must obtain from food. Nettle lacks nothing. The iron content is even more remarkable. Dried nettle contains 41 milligrams of iron per 100 grams. This is the highest iron content of any plant food ever measured. Spinach, famous for its iron content thanks to a century of Popeye cartoons, contains 2.7 milligrams per 100 grams. Nettle contains 15 times more iron than spinach. The plant also contains significant amounts of calcium, magnesium, potassium and vitamins A and C. It contains serotonin, histamine and acetylcholine. It contains formic acid, the same compound found in ant venom, which is responsible for the sting. But that formic acid breaks down completely when the plant is cooked, dried or even just wilted. The sting that defines the plant in modern consciousness disappears entirely with minimal processing. Traditional European cultures knew this. Nettle soup was a spring ritual across the continent for centuries. After a winter of stored foods, preserved meats, and root vegetables, the first nettles of spring provided a concentrated dose of exactly the nutrients that would be depleted after months without fresh greens. Iron, vitamin C, complete protein. The tradition was not arbitrary. It was nutritional wisdom accumulated over generations. In Scotland, nettle soup remained common into the 20th century. In Scandinavia, nettles were lacto-fermented and preserved for winter use. In Russia, nettle was added to bread dough to increase protein content during times of scarcity. In the Balkans, nettle was stuffed into pastries. Every culture that lived alongside this plant found ways to eat it. The Second World War brought nettle back into European consciousness briefly. Britain's Dig for Victory campaign included nettle collection drives. The government recognised that a plant growing wild across the country could supplement food supplies during rationing. German civilians were again required to harvest nettles, this time for both food and fibre. In occupied territories where food supplies were disrupted, nettle soup became a survival food once more. Then the war ended. Industrial agriculture resumed, chemical herbicides became widely available, and nettle was pushed back to the margins once more. Today, nettle is classified as a noxious weed in most American states. Agricultural Extension Services publish bulletins on nettle control. Herbicide manufacturers market products specifically designed to eliminate it. The plant that clothed German soldiers and fed European peasants through centuries of hardship is treated as a pest to be eradicated. The reasons are not mysterious. Nettle cannot be patented. It cannot be genetically modified in any meaningful way because it already grows everywhere and spreads freely. It cannot be controlled by seed companies because it self-propagates aggressively. It requires no fertilizer, no irrigation, no pesticides. It grows in poor soil. It grows in rich soil. It grows in sun and partial shade. It grows despite every attempt to eliminate it. From the perspective of industrial agriculture, nettle has no value because it cannot create dependency. A farmer who grows nettle needs nothing from the chemical companies. A household that harvests nettle from the edges of their property needs nothing from the grocery store. The plant provides food, fibre and medicine without any corporate intermediary. In an economic system that profits from dependency, a plant that provides independence is worthless. Worse than worthless, it is a threat. So the sting became the story. The plant that fed and clothed civilizations became defined by the minor irritation it causes when touched carelessly. Children are taught to avoid it. Adults spray it with chemicals. The knowledge of how to harvest it, how to process it, how to eat it, how to wear it, fades with each generation. But the plant remains. That is the thing about nettle. It cannot be eradicated. It grows back. It spreads. It survives. Every attempt to eliminate it fails eventually. The roots go deep. The seeds spread far. The plant that clothed Bronze Age warriors and fed medieval peasants and uniformed German soldiers simply waits. The fibre is still there in every stem. The protein is still there in every leaf. The iron and calcium and vitamins are still there in every plant growing in every ditch and hedgerow and forgotten corner. The knowledge of how to use it still exists, preserved in old books and folk memories and the practices of the few who never forgot. Hans Christian Andersen wrote a fairy tale called Wild Swans, in which a princess must weave shirts from nettles to save her brothers from an enchantment. The story is usually read as pure fantasy, but Andersen was Danish. He grew up in a culture where nettle cloth was still remembered. The story was not invented from nothing. It was based on something real, something his grandmother's generation would have known how to do. The question is not whether nettle is valuable. The archaeological record proves it was valuable. The nutritional data proves it is valuable. The historical record proves it was valuable enough to sustain a nation through total war. The question is why we forgot. The answer is that forgetting was profitable for some and costly for others. The textile industry that depends on cotton and synthetic fibres has no interest in a plant that anyone can grow. The chemical industry that sells herbicides has no interest in a plant that people might want to keep. The food industry that sells supplements has no interest in a plant that provides the same nutrients for free. But you have an interest. You have an interest in a plant that can feed you protein equivalent to beef without requiring a feedlot. You have an interest in a plant that can provide iron without requiring a prescription. You have an interest in a plant that your ancestors wore, ate, and valued for 5,000 years. Nettle is not hard to find. It grows across North America, Europe, Asia, and North Africa. It prefers rich, moist soil, but tolerates almost anything. It often grows near human habitation, in the disturbed soil where people live and work. It has followed humanity for millennia. It is following you now. Harvesting requires only gloves and scissors. The young shoots in spring are most tender, and leaves can be harvested throughout the growing season. Cooking, drying, or even crushing the leaves neutralizes the sting completely. Nettle can be prepared as soup, as tea, as a cooked green similar to spinach and as a dried herb, or as a powder added to smoothies or baked goods. The fibre can still be processed by anyone willing to learn the old methods. The plant that clothed your ancestors is waiting. The protein that rivals beef is growing within walking distance of where you sit. The iron that exceeds any other plant source is available for the cost of a pair of gloves and a few minutes of attention. What was forgotten can be remembered. What was suppressed can be reclaimed. What was classified as worthless by those who profit from your dependency can be recognized as valuable by those who seek independence. The nettle does not care what the agricultural bulletins say. It does not care what the herbicide labels claim. It grows, it spreads, it waits. It has been waiting for 5,000 years. It will be waiting tomorrow. If this vault opened something for you, share it with someone who needs to remember. The next vault opens soon.